Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, sir.
It's after 2 o'clock, so the inquiry is resumed. In terms of housekeeping, the only thing I've got to mention is that I've now got a copy of an additional representation from Mr. Andrew Devine. I don't know whether it's been copied to the main parties yet. If not, perhaps Mrs. Page, would you be so good as to put a copy on the core document web page? That's probably the easiest place for everybody to see it. Yeah, Mr. Devine is a local resident. He has concerns about the amount of development taking place in Overton and the pressure on facilities and resources. Perhaps Mrs. Charles could pick that up maybe when she gives her evidence in chief.
Thank you, sir. We have seen that. Thank you.
Okay. In which case, unless there's anything else from my advocate to pick up, we'll move on to the evidence in chief of Mr. Butterworth, who is going to be presenting a planning issue case for the council. Mr. Defoe, would you care to call your witness, please?
Thank you, sir. Just in terms of list of documents, if I could start with that, I think you'll need access to the two planning proofs of evidence, Mr. Butterworth and the appellants. You may want to have core document 69, which you may have separately already. It's the bundle of plans, the appeal bundle of plans, core document 69.
Yes, I can't see 69 unless I'm blind on the core document page. I actually do have them available on a different application, so I don't think there's any need to slow things up. But unless it's out of order,
I'll get someone to check that they're on the website. But provided that you've got a decent plan of the scheme, then
I have
work from that.
Yes, sure.
And we'll try and find one that everyone's got in front of them. And then the other document that we might refer to is core document 23, which is a layout that Ms. Charles refers to in her evidence. I think it's called the Taylor-Wimpey scheme or the Taylor-Wimpey layout or something.
So that was 21. No.
23.
Oh, 23. Yeah, now I've got it.
69 is there, sir. It's about 20 items down the list in the middle of the 50s. It is out of order, slightly hidden away. It's between 54 and 60, and it goes to 68.
Ah, yes, I got you. I'll open it up. Okay, I'm with you, Mr. Defoe. Yeah.
And then the final document I was going to mention, and if you don't have it easily to hand, then I don't think it matters too much. Within the application, the planning application documents, which you might have separately or you may not have, there's a design and access statement, which isn't a core document.
I can get to it.
But if you have access to that, that would be great. I don't think it's essential, as I say. So,
okay.
And I think those are all we'll need.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you, Mr. Butterworth, from 1.2 of your proof of evidence. And can I ask you first to confirm that you are indeed Jeremy Butterworth?
Yes.
I said 1.2. I don't think I mean that. You're director and owner of JB Butterworth Planning Limited, a town planning consultancy based in London and Reading.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
And you're a member of the chartered member of the RTPI and hold a BSc degree in human geography and an MA in planning policy and practice.
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you very much. And similarly, we'll take your proof of evidence largely as read. I'd just like you to start, just in case we have anyone who is watching on the YouTube or otherwise, to just give us an overview, in case they haven't been there previously, of where we are now and the reasons for refusal that remain outstanding, please.
Yes, it's only now effectively reasons 1 and 2, which are still outstanding. The third reason for refusal was overcome by the submission of revised plans as described in the statement of common ground and as mentioned previously. However, the issue of the location of the kickabout area is still an issue and will be discussed as part of this evidence today in relation to reason for refusal 1. Reasons for refusal 4 and 5 have hopefully been overcome by the submitted unanimous undertaking as to be discussed tomorrow. And we've recently heard from Catherine Backhouse in regards to the highways first reason for refusal. Therefore, my evidence today will concentrate on the second reason for refusal as well as the planning balance.
Thank you. And just before we dive into the reason for refusal 2, just ask, if I may, for a brief overview of any points in terms of the site context that you want the inspector to take into account.
Yes, yeah, as acknowledged earlier, the site is allocated with the Overton neighbourhood plan as site F, which allocates it for approximately 70 dwellings and includes a designated green space and access from London Road, which is the B3400, and also for a public right of way towards the lower end of Tugate Lane. This is shown in court document 12, which everyone will have seen. So, it is common grounds, and that's common knowledge, that the council have no objections to the principle of the residential development of the site. However, as we will discuss later, that the site is located in an edge of village location, which does come with several sensitivities.
Okay, thank you. And is there anything about the site itself that you want to mention at this stage?
Yes, as we'll discuss in a bit more detail later, that it is agreed in the statement of common ground that the site is relatively flat. However, you will get a sense of the topography of the site on a site visit, and it does rise from the lowest point towards the northwest of the site towards the southeast, as shown within the proof of evidence, which we'll discuss in a bit more detail.
Okay, are you happy to turn to that later then?
Yeah. We can go through that later. Yeah.
Okay. So is that everything you want to say in terms of site context?
That's the key. That's the key issue, really. Obviously there's the sort of the access to the site and things like that, but that's been discussed, the last couple of days, so it's not really necessary to repeat those.
Thank you. And then moving to reason for refusal 2. Just ask you to remind us where we find that set out and just summarise that for us, please.
Yes, the second reason for refusal is set out in my proof of evidence, which I think is 4.1.1, and obviously within the reasons for refusal document. And in brief, the reason for refusal is that the proposed development would result in an unacceptable cramped form of development in relation to the site area.
And you set that out in full at 4.1.1 for anyone who wants to follow that. Now, within that reason for refusal, there's reference to policy EM10 of the Basing, Stoke and Dean Local Plan 2011 to 2029, and the Design and Sustainability Supplementary Planning Document, which is from July 2018. Just want to deal a little bit with the policy context with you, please.
Yeah.
And just ask you to start with the development plan policy EM10, which is cited in the reason for refusal, in which you set out, I think, at 4.1.2 or below that in your evidence.
Yes. Yeah. As I say in that, I've identified conflicts with 3 parts of this policy, which is parts 1D, 2A and 2C. I believe in the submitted copy of the original proof of evidence there was a typo, In paragraph, I think it was 4.1.3, which actually identified part 2D as being a conflict. However,
Right.
can I just clarify that this should say 2C? This was relayed to the appellants by email on, I think it was the 28th of September, and was copied into the planning inspectorate. So hopefully the inspector has received that.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. And then you've highlighted those 3 parts. Can I just ask you then to just briefly deal with each of them, please?
Yeah. Part 1D seeks to promote the efficient use of land and achieve appropriate housing densities, which respond to the local context as informed by community documents and which take into account the urban, suburban or rural location of the site. I contend that the proposal does not respond to the local context as informed by community documents and does not take into account the rural edge location of the site.
Okay. 2A then, please.
2A is seeking to positively contribute to local distinctiveness, the sense of place and the existing street scene, and seeks to take into account the relevant SPDs and community documents that identify the local character and distinctiveness of an area, which is valued by local communities and allows for innovation where appropriate. As we'll discuss later, I contend that the proposal does not contribute to the local distinctiveness as it has not taken into account the relevant SPDs or community documents.
And then, forgive me, I may have interrupted you. If you haven't got anything more to say on 2A at this stage, can I ask you to deal with 2C, please?
Yeah. 2C seeks to have due regard to the density, scale, layout, appearance, architectural detail, and materials and history of the surrounding area, and the relationship to neighbouring buildings, landscape features, and heritage assets. The argument on this one is that I contend that the layout and appearance has not taken into consideration the relationship to the neighbouring buildings or the landscape features.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully that's a summary of the points that we'll then go on to a little bit more detail. The other document cited in the reason for refusal is the Design and Sustainability SPD, the July 2018 document. And I think if anyone wanted to look at it, it's called document 15. I don't know, it's not one that I asked the inspector to get out, and I don't know that we necessarily need to have the inspector get it out now, but are there any points for the inspector's note which you want to particularly draw attention to?
Yeah, I've identified sort of 3 key points really. I mean, we'll look at these in more detail later, but the headlines really are that on page 40, paragraphs 4.34 and 4.35 deal with the location of open space, and then the paragraph 6.52 and key design principle ABS 12. These deal with the topography, which I think is on page 59, 60, and paragraph 6.66 and key design principle ABS 14. And this deals with the rural layouts, which I think is page 62 and 63.
And I think you've set out those paragraphs in your
they're
in your brief as well.
More detail
Fine. And taking into account what the SPD says about open space, says about topography, that sort of thing, how, in your view, does the local SPD, how does that sit with what might be said at the national design level? Please, just ask you to deal briefly with policy documents at the national level.
Yes, yeah. Well, within my proof, I've referred to the primarily the National Design Guide and the Building for Healthy Life Design Code. It's a bit of a mouthful, that one. I won't cite them all, but the National Design Guides effectively requires well-designed new developments to respond positively to the features of the site and the surrounding context beyond the site boundary, and it also seeks to enhance the positive qualities and improve negative ones, including physical features. And two of the points it raises are that it should take into account existing built development, including the layout, form, scale, appearance, details, and materials. And also it should take into account landform, topography, geography, and ground conditions. So the key parts there are really the sort of existing development and topography.
So that's the national design guide, and you probably deal with a little bit more of the national design guide in your proof. Key guidance within buildings for healthy life that you want to refer to. That was, I think, the other document you mentioned.
The key part of that is I think it was on page 38, which I won't list all the criteria, but one seeks to allow time for good design, seeks to allow to walk the site and the surroundings work, plan for, and the need to discuss, understands, and agree opportunities, constraints, that makes use of the topography and other existing assets on or beyond the site, and then also seeks to that development should work with the contours of the land.
Okay. Sorry, again, just check that you're happy with what you've said about building for healthy life.
Yes, yeah. I may sort of briefly mention it later as well.
Sure. So looked at the development plan policy, dealt with the SPD, briefly touched upon the national design guidance, all of which are covered in a little bit more detail in your proof. Are there any particular parts of the national planning policy framework that you want us to just take into account in terms of framing your evidence?
I think the key paragraphs are 126 and 134, which effectively demonstrate the importance of good design, and they also make reference to local design policies and design guidance. In brief, paragraph 126 states that the creation of high quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings is fundamental to what the planning and development process should achieve. Good design is a key aspect of sustainable development, creates better places in which to live and work, and helps make development acceptable to communities. Paragraph 134 confirms that development that is not well designed should be refused, especially where it fails to reflect local design policies and government guidance on design, and makes reference including the National Design Guide.
Thank you. So that is the national policy context and development plan policy context, which obviously the inspector will probably be familiar with and will be applying anyway, and can look at what you said about that in more detail in your evidence. I want to turn now, please, to deal with you the specific points that you make about this scheme and your concerns with this scheme. I'd asked people to get out core document 69, which is the bundle of plans, and I think the plan to look at in that is probably page 9 of that document, but others would do as well. And with that in front of you, can I just ask you to bullet point the main issues that you want to address, and then I'll ask you to deal with those main bullet points by reference to those plans in more detail.
Yes, yeah. In terms of bullet points, I think the main points are that firstly, the layout of the dwellings in the central area. Okay. Secondly, the location of the open space.
Okay, just take it nice and slowly, so that we can take a note. No, that's absolutely fine. So first two and the third one.
I believe there's a missed opportunity for gardens backing onto existing development.
Right.
Sorry, your microphone went a little bit garbled there. Just repeat that, will you, please, Mr. Butterworth?
Sorry, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Third point there.
I think I said there's a missed opportunity for gardens backing onto existing development. Okay.
That was your third point, which we'll look at.
Yes.
And any other points you want to sort of bullet?
Fourthly, the facts that there are sort of a large number of non-detached dwellings, which creates a more suburban form where I think a more rural layout would be more appropriate. And I think the final point was that the layout of development with perimeter blocks could potentially be broken up with a more rural style.
Okay.
And you know, together these issues sort of add up to a perception of a cramped form of development, which is unsuitable for the rural edge location in which the site sits.
So those bullet points feed into your assessment of a perception of a cramped form of development, which is unsuitable for the rural edge location.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, I imagine there's a degree of overlap with some of those points. I appreciate you've tried to separate them out for us. Can I ask you now to talk us through each one? So the first one you gave was I think the layout of the dwellings being located in a central area.
Yes, yeah. And as you say, that they may overlap. So forgive me if I repeat myself. In terms of the layout, I think my proof of evidence, which I believe is page 18.
Yeah.
I've addressed sort of the various parts of the relevant guidance which deal with topography of sites. And I think sort of if you refer to paragraphs 4.1.8 sort of onwards, but then more specifically 4.1.9 and then 4.1.12 and 4.1.15, sort of you'll get the gist of the main policy point.
Okay, and that's that topography point that you've sort of already.
Yeah. I think that those generally refer to sort of the sort of topography points in relation to design and sustainability, SPD, the Overton Village Design Statements, and the Basingstoke and Dean Landscape Character Assessment.
Right.
Which are all within the core documents list.
And so, okay, so you've told us where to look in your proof.
Yeah.
What do you say the inspector should draw, if anything, from that?
I feel that based on this local design guidance, the new development should take more account of the existing topography of the site. The guidance suggests that the village of Overton lies largely concealed within its valley, and suggests that major development should be concentrated largely within the lower areas of the sites which slope upwards. As I alluded to before, that the site does slope upwards from the northwestern corner to the southeastern corner, which would be obvious from a site visit, and is also apparent. I think I said earlier there's a plan in the design access statement, which I believe is on page 6, and there's no extract in my proof.
Should we start with your proof of evidence? Do you want to go to that and then take us to where you want to go in the design and access statement, or the other way around?
Yes, yeah. In the proof, which is so bear with me. 4.1.20, wasn't it?
Are you referring to page 21?
Yes, page 21, yes. So the OS extract on there. So as you can see from that, the contour lines show a slope coming from the northwest towards the southeast. I think actually the design access statement shows this in probably more detail, because it's got the more detailed contour lines.
Okay, do you want to take us to that then?
Yeah, that was page Actually, there's a few within the design access statement. I think it's page 6, page 7, or page 8. Effectively, show the same thing.
Okay, well, tell us. So we've got the design and access statement, which I think was an application document, so
Yeah,
won't be in the core documents. People might just need a little second to get to it.
No, I've got it.
And then you asked us to look, I think, first at page 6. So what do you want?
yeah. I mean, this clearly shows that sort of towards the, I've got it in my bearing straight now. The northwest and the sort of western edge of the site is lower, and there's quite a pronounced slope up towards the middle of the site, and then the slope becomes sort of more gradual, and then the highest point is towards the southeastern part of the site, basically.
Right. Is there anything else you want the inspector to note from this document, or have we?
That's the key. That's the key point, really. I mean, obviously, this will be probably more apparent actually on the site visit.
Okay, dealing with this point about the layout of the dwellings in the central area. You've dealt with the guidance. You've shown us the topography, and we'll see that on the site. Can I now ask you to deal with the layout, as it were, and to explain to the inspector what your concerns are about the layout by reference to the plan?
Yes, yeah. I mean, as you can see from the site layout plan, much of the built form is towards the sort of eastern and southeastern part of the site, which is, from the topography, likely to be the more prominent part of the site from longer views, and will therefore extend the built-up area higher up into the valley, where it creates in my opinion, a harder and more visible urban edge. So that this would exacerbate the cramped form and more urban appearance of the site in longer views.
So you've dealt with the layout, and you said that some of it's been positioned further, I think, up the slope, and that, I think you'll explain, is not responsive to topography. Where would you have suggested, or where do you think that additional development would be better placed, if anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, the open space within the site, or the main amenity area of the site, is within the northeastern lowest part of the site, and the suburban, more urban part of the development, the dwellings are within the higher part. So I think there is, as we can explain later, that there is some scope for potentially swapping them over, or placing the open areas towards the higher parts of the site, more towards the southeast, really.
Okay, so is that a good stage to move on to your second point, the location?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of alluded to that already, haven't I? Really?
Can I ask you on that point, because it's absolutely right to recognise that on this point, as indeed with the views that you take on the design of the scheme, you and the committee are at odds with the view reached by the urban design officer and the view set out in the committee report. And in particular on the location of the green space, one of the points that the committee report made was that by moving it from the southeastern part of the site to the northwestern part of the site, so you'll have seen the suggestion in the neighbourhood plan that it be in the southeastern corner, that by moving it, the committee report indicated that this would break up the built form and provide a more sensitive transition with the existing housing. So the committee report and these are matters of planning judgment, but it doesn't agree with you and doesn't agree with the view the committee reached on this. Can you just help us, please, with why you disagree with that assessment, or if you disagree with that assessment?
Yeah, I can see that the views and those observations made by design officer and planning officer, are potentially reasonable. Urban design is a very subjective analysis, really. But in my view, the harm caused by the location of the open space in the northwest northwest of the site far outweighs the positives of it being in the place. And the location of this open space and the impact on the neighbours was clearly something which concerned the committee, and did form part of Clover's refusal.
Okay, so matter of judgment between you. Can you explain then why you reach a different judgment to that reached in the committee report on this issue?
Yes. I've looked at the key design principles within the design and sustainability SPD group, which I think is a good place to start in this analysis. And firstly, there was key design principle ABS10, which seeks to incorporate and protect natural features, and seeks to place these in prominent positions to ensure the arrangement and design of buildings respond positively to these features. And also ABS12, which seeks to respond positively to the topography of the site. And as I said earlier, the National Design Guide also requires that developments take account of existing development and topography. And turning to the design and sustainability SPD in a bit more detail, it confirms that paragraph 4.34 that it is important to consider how open space can be integrated effectively into the structure, and states that, for example, areas of open space will constitute important focal points for activity, recreation, and interaction. So therefore, these need to be in prominent places within the layout. And then the following paragraph, 4.35 within the SPD, confirms that these open spaces should also be located where they are visually prominent and can take advantage of attractive views.
Okay.
Therefore, my analysis of this is that the more attractive views would obviously be the higher grounds and towards the southeast of the site, rather than the dip in the northwestern corner. So therefore, this higher grounds from the southeast would be a better location for the large amenity kickabout area, which would offer views of the countryside beyond, rather than the current arrangement, which looks towards the rear of the existing gardens on the road adjacent, and the new development, which includes flank walls of some of the proposed dwellings. And it was also key that this southeastern location was originally envisaged as part of the neighbourhood plan, and is shown on the allocation.
So that's open space in terms of views, I think, and locating in a prominent location.
Yeah.
Is there any other reason why the location of the open space from a design point of view causes you concerns?
Yes, as we alluded to earlier, the third reason for refusal, which although is withdrawn, did cite the concerns of the committee about the impact on neighbours from the kickabout area, and looking at the design and sustainability SPD at paragraph 4.36, it says it's vital to think about how the space is likely to be used and to consider community safety implications. It states that it is important to ensure that open space benefits from high levels of natural surveillance. So therefore, public spaces need to be directly overlooked on front of houses and located within prominent positions. And the following paragraph in the SPD also states that relationship with neighbouring residents is also an important issue in terms of safety and community cohesion. And it actually refers specifically to kickabout areas, stating that if the space should be used for informal sport, such as kickabout, it may need to be further away from houses so as to prevent detrimental impacts on the form and detrimental impacts in the form of noise and disturbance.
So if I just pause you there, so you're dealing there with the design, local design guidance on this issue of amenity issue, which was part of reason for refusal 3, but is now being dealt with in refusal 2, as we discussed at the CMC. So that's what the design guidance says. How does that apply then to the layout that we have here, please?
The design guidance does require a buffer, between these spaces and existing dwellings. And there is some sort of landscaping, but as well as being inadequately located in the design, the kickabout area does offer the possibility of causing detriment to the immunity of these residents. It's a large open space, and it's likely to spill towards the studs area, which kids will play in, people will play in, and this is very close to the boundaries with the properties at Morse Farm and the roads backing onto it, which are Nightingale Eyes and Waltham Road. And in my opinion, that there is potential for balls against fences and noise and disturbance at night time or any time of day, really.
Okay, so that is the concern about the amenity impact of the local space, open space area. The next point you referred to was the possibility of a missed opportunity, I think you said, for gardens backing onto existing development.
Yeah.
And I just would ask you to explain what you mean by that and how that sits with the issues you've already discussed.
Yes, I've referred to the Building for a Healthy Life design guidance.
And you've referred to that already.
Yes. Yeah,
right.
I've referred to that, which is actually cited within VPF. I believe that paragraph 133 as being a relevant sort of guidance. And this states that on page 38, the development should be sensitive to existing development, but avoid creating buffer spaces between existing and new back gardens. And it sort of creates a checklist, as it were, of they call it red negative design elements and green positive elements. The red negative elements include unmanaged gaps between development uses privacy buffers to existing residents, and a positive element it identifies is including interlocking back gardens between existing and new development where existing back gardens are drawing site boundary.
And just standing back, why do you think it suggests that those are good and bad things, and what do you identify as the missed opportunity here?
Yeah, I mean this does create the current layout does create a large buffer between the existing dwellings and the proposed dwellings. I believe that this buffer is somewhere in the region of, I think the closest is 37 metres and up to 95 metres between the existing edge of the village and the nearest dwelling and the proposed development. And this buffer does sit at a lower level than the rest of the site. And therefore, you're going to have, I mean, this goes back to the previous point that you get sort of a gap and then dwellings on the higher ground beyond, which therefore sort of does not contribute to a soft urban edge because it pushes the built parts of the site closer to the countryside rather than concentrating the built form closer to the existing edge of the village where it's less visible. My opinion is this creates a perception of a cramped form of development towards the centre of the site, which becomes almost a self-contained development and not a contiguous with a village, extension effectively.
Okay. And what the missed opportunity, what would be better than about having gardens backing onto the existing development? I mean, would that lose the sensitive transition that the committee report referred to in your view?
Yeah, I mean I feel that the missed opportunity is that the existing development and the proposed development, by having back-to-back gardens and moving the open space more towards the eastern and southern part of the site, would create, obviously it would create a more continuous development, but it would create a better buffer with the countryside beyond and a softer urban edge to the village.
Okay.
Because you would have the village sort of petering out into the countryside rather than effectively what you've got now is village, green space, more village.
Can I ask you then, unless there's anything else you want to say? I think we've gone on dealt with the open space quite some length. Your next point was the number of semi-detached dwellings being more suburban in form, and that you think that a more rural layout might be more appropriate, if I've fairly summarised your point.
Yes, yeah. Referring to the design and sustainability SPP, one of the key design principles, ABS 14, in relation to the arrangement of buildings and spaces, seeks to ensure that rural development has a rural character as opposed to a suburban character.
And just pausing there, why should this be treated, do you say, as a more rural development?
It's the site is currently within the defined countryside. It's outside the defined settlement boundary. It's on the edge of a village. It's effectively currently a farm. This all combined gives it more of a sort of a rural character rather than an urban character.
Does the fact that it's allocated make a difference to that character, in your opinion?
I mean, this is why I'm saying rural edge rather than rural, because it's clearly, designated to be an extension of the village, but the edge of the village rather than, a continuation of suburbia.
Fine, thank you. So you referred to ABS 14, and just ask you then to apply that here and tell us.
Yes.
Give us some facts and figures, if you will.
Yes. The design and sustainability SPP states that paragraph 6.66 that when designing rural layouts, development should avoid suburban style layouts, which it defines as lots of semi-detached properties with detached or integral garages. In addition, it also states that rural arrangements are often based on detached houses and short terraces or rows of rural style houses. Although we do acknowledge that development does contain a mix of dwelling types and sizes. However, from the floor plans and site plans submitted, I've calculated that of the 82 dwellings, there will be 6 flats and 28 semi-detached properties, as well as 8 terrace properties. Although I acknowledge that short terraces and rows of rural style houses are appropriate, I think that both terraces are not, rural style terraces. They're more suburban style terraces, and therefore the proposed development has a more suburban style layout and one more appropriate for rural areas, because approximately 50% of the dwellings are non-detached properties, which is a more suburban form and therefore leads to a more cramped form of development.
So one of the points made is that there are detached properties sort of towards the boundary, and some of the semi-detached ones have been located further into the site. can I just ask you to deal with that point and whether you think that this attempt or this effort to provide some form of transition has been effective?
Yeah, I'll see that, obviously detached properties towards the edge, is more rural and, meets this criteria. However, I think that the overall layout of the site with the built form sort of towards the more prominent parts of the site and the open space in the dip and all this combined leads to the cramped form rather than the actual detached dwellings on the edge, which is not too much of an issue. I think it's more that the central part of the site and the fact that the edge is more towards the southeast than it perhaps should be.
Okay, thank you. Just dealing briefly then, I think your final sort of bullet point was perimeter blocks and the use of the perimeter blocks here. I'll just ask you to deal with that, please.
Yes, this kind of comes back to the point from before that I think it's actually raised in the same paragraph within the SPD that
right,
more rural development should include and incorporate more rural type arrangements such as sort of farmyard style courtyards, and the proposed development is comprised entirely of perimeter blocks with no sort of courtyard arrangements to break up this layout, which, as I say, leads to a more cramped suburban form of layout rather than more rural style, which may be more appropriate.
Okay. Finally, I think for refusal 2, I just want to deal with one point that's raised in the appellant's evidence, and that is the alternative or an earlier iteration of a site layout for I think it was produced for the neighbourhood plan process. That's core document 23, please.
Document 23, the Taylor Wimpey plan, isn't it?
Yeah.
There it is, yeah.
And I think it's referred to in the appellant's evidence at 4.71. And just ask you to explain, firstly, make sure I've properly understood what this plan is, what it was produced for, and to deal with the points that the appellant makes at 471 about it, please.
Yes, my understanding, hopefully the appellant can correct me if we're incorrect, but my understanding was that this is a layout proposed as part of the sort of promotion of the site in the early neighbourhood plan process to show how that this site could work with approximately 70 dwellings.
Right.
Obviously, it would have been subject to detailed design, but in my view, this overcomes some issues I've identified.
Okay, and can you just help me with headline why it overcomes some of those?
Yeah. I mean, in brief, as you can see, sort of the northwestern corner has, the back-to-back properties, as we've discussed. It has the amenity space and the open areas towards the south and southeast of the site, giving them more prominent views of the countryside, and and therefore sort of there's less development on potentially the higher ground.
And the point the appellant makes, or the points, certainly some of them that are made in the proof of evidence on this layout, is they say that it's omitted the woodland buffer, which I think would be to the right-hand side of the page on that, and that it's omitted SUDs in terms of provision of SUDs, and that those those would be essential to make the scheme acceptable in planning terms. Can I just ask for your response to those points, please?
Yes, yeah. I mean, as I said, this wasn't subject to detailed design, so there are obviously things missing. I imagine there's probably sort of car parking spaces missing and all sorts as well. But I think that there would, looking at that plan, there is ample space within that site for a woodland buffer. Maybe it would require sort of squeezing up the middle slightly, or removing a few dwellings, or sort of, moving everything slightly further south. But a woodland buffer and suds looks like it could be incorporated somewhere in that red line.
Right. And would it necessarily require moving the development from the northwestern corner of the site, as you've indicated is part of your difficulties with the current design?
No, not sure. I think you could, there seems to be, this scheme seems to be concentrated more to the north of the site than the proposal. So it looks like there would be some element of scope for, adding some suds measures in buffers into that scheme.
Okay, well, appellants have relied on that site plan, so I thought we'd better deal with it. Finally, just on reason for refusal 2, just want to check that you've covered everything you want to cover, and if not, if you have, just ask for your views as to whether the committee were justified in refusing on this basis.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think I've covered everything. So in terms of whether it's justified or not, I think sort of the combination of all the elements I've mentioned, maybe each one on its own may not be enough, but the combination of all these elements combined, I think, creates a development that features prominence, chooses topography in its layout and form, creates a development which, in my opinion, doesn't create a soft edge to the village, and therefore appears as a current form of development. Therefore, I think the reason of refusal is justified, as the development is contrary to the elements of the design and sustainability SPD that we've discussed, and also that the relevant sort of sections within policy EM10. And as also discussed, this conflict is backed up by the design guidance, community documents, and then ultimately back up to the National Planning Policy Framework.
Thank you. You've given your view on that. You've explained just then the links to the development plan policy. You've explained references to the design guidance and NPPF, and you set out your view. Do you say that is the view that every single person looking at this scheme would have to reach? What room for discretion in these matters is there, please?
Yes, planning policy is planning policy, but design guidance is in my opinion very subjective. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, don't they? These things are open to interpretation. There's many levels of design guidance, and it's probably impossible to satisfy every criteria of every design guidance. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to come to separate conclusions, and obviously the committee and I have come to separate and different conclusions than the planning officers and the design officers. And I'm sure, if you put sort of 7 planners in a room, you'd get a sort of a 4-3 split or something.
Fine. Well, thank you. You've explained your views on that point. Unless there's anything else to deal with in terms of reason for refusal 2, I want to then look at the planning balance, please.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just going to deal with this by way of topics. I think, obviously, the ultimate balance is in dispute. but a lot of these points I think are relatively uncontroversial, hopefully. So just dealing first, if I may, with 5-year housing land supply, can you just explain where we are on 5-year housing land supply and how you've approached it here?
Yeah, I mean, we've taken a fairly light-hearted approach not light-hearted, but light touch approach to the 5-year housing supply. I mean, as we discussed in the statement of common ground, we've agreed with the appellant that the council cannot demonstrate 5-year housing land supply. And so therefore, because this is not in dispute, we haven't done any calculations or anything, and for the purposes of the planning balance, I've only really assessed the position in relation to a recent August 2021 appeal decision in just down the road in Basingstoke and Dean Council, which I believe the inspector has Article 67.
And just to frame that was an appeal where housing land supply was in dispute, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, it was an appeal where the inspector didn't dispute, and in this appeal, the inspector did not take appeal on the housing shortfall. That I think the sort of the appellants and the council were sort of on a rough sort of agreement, and I think it was 4.11 years and 4.83 years, resulting in a shortfall of I think it was between 154 and 816 homes, and the inspector took that as that's that the inspector basically took that as there is a shortfall. The housing requirement is based on the standard methodology because the local plan is more than 5 years old, but the 5-year housing supply shortfall was between moderate and significant and not severe.
Okay, so well, we can look at it if we need to, but the inspector looked at it, found a range 4.11 years, 4.83 years, and as you just said, concluded that was between a moderate and significant shortfall, but not severe. What does that mean in terms of the application of the tilted balance, and what does that mean, please, in terms of the weight that you say should be given to the provision of housing in the planning balance here?
Yeah, based on the lack of 5-year housing supply, I think it's common ground between the appellant and the council that paragraph 11D in the tilted balance is triggered, and on that basis, I've given significant weight to the provision of housing.
Okay, thank you. Now, second topic, please. Weight to be attached to the conflict with policy, and just ask you to deal firstly with the consistency of, or otherwise, of those relevant policies with the NPPF, please.
Yes, I mean, in terms of the planning policies, I've outlined within my proof of evidence in section 8.3 that despite predating the framework, that the development plan policies are broadly consistent with the framework, and therefore I have not reduced the weight of these policies on this basis.
Fine. So that's one exercise. The other exercise, of course, is we find ourselves in the position of lack of 5-year housing land supply rendering the most important policies out of date. How do you say that should affect the weight to be applied to those policies in this case, or to the relevant policies in this case?
In terms of the sort of the housing supply policies, I think it's common ground, and we state this in the statement of common ground, that the lack of 5-year housing supply means that policy SS1 of the local plan and the policy SS1, the neighbourhood plan, as well as H2 and F2, are out of date and carry less weight in the planning section. However, these are only out of date by virtue of footnote 8 of the NPPF that the council is unable to demonstrate the 5-year housing supply.
So that's sorry to interrupt. Those are the sort of supply policies, I think that you're referring
Yes,
to.
yeah. So I was referring to the supply
Um,
policies, yeah.
and you've said that they should carry less weight
Yeah, well, yeah,
because of the lack of 5-year housing land supply.
yeah.
Can you deal then with policies in the reasons for refusal CN9 and EM10? How does your judgment work in respect of those policies?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the weight is a matter of planning judgment, but in the context of the Regis refusal, these policies don't have any impact on the principle of development, but only with the detailed matters of that development once the principle has been established. They don't seek to restrict development, but they seek to ensure that the development that comes forward can provide, in the case of the CN9, can provide safe and suitable highways access, etc. And in the case of EM10, provide suitable design, layouts, etc. So whilst I said that one might reduce the weight attached to them, I wouldn't substantially reduce the weight of these because they don't restrict the principle of development, but simply control the way that development comes forward. So therefore, the absence of a 5-year housing land supply shouldn't really alter whether the highways access is safe or not, or whether the scheme is well designed.
Okay, thank you. So that's weight to conflict with policy, I think. Dealing then with the final topic in terms of weight before I turn to your overall judgment. The weight to be attached to benefits, please. You've dealt with this, I think, in 8.12 of your proof of evidence.
Yes.
And I think we might also want to look at the appellant's proof of evidence to see how it's dealt with there. Paragraph 6.4, which is page 34, I think. So, in fact, probably working from the appellant's proof, could I just ask you to talk us through any differences that there may be or may not be between you on benefits?
Yes, yeah, as I say, I think the benefits I've listed are potentially the same as the benefits the appellant's listed. So, although we do differ in the weight, the appellant lists 13 benefits. The first 6 of the appellant's list all relate to the efficient use of the site, the delivery of housing, provision of affordable housing. I mean, I recognise there are substantial benefits to the scheme in the context of the 5-year housing supply position, and I believe I've come to the same conclusion within my proof that the provision of housing is a substantial benefit. However, in my opinion, the 6 benefits listed by the council, by the appellant, effectively say the same thing 6 times. So I think it's important, careful not to double count these benefits. And I think, in terms of affordable housing, I think it's also worth noting that the council are currently providing affordable housing in excess of their target, and obviously the affordable housing is only required as a planning obligation as part of the scheme. They are
nonetheless,
benefits, but I don't think there's 6. I don't think there's 6 benefits. I think it's effectively supply of housing and affordable housing are benefits, substantial benefits.
Fine, thank you. The 7th benefit, which I think does that address SILV?
Yes. Yeah, I mean the SIL is primarily provided to meet additional needs generated by the development. And a similar size development in terms of floor space elsewhere in the borough would require a similar level of SIL payments. So, in my opinion, this should be minimal weight rather than substantial.
Okay, so you say minimal, appellant says substantial. The 8th, 9th, and 10th benefits listed by the appellant, if I broadly head those as sort of other economic benefits, just ask you to deal with those.
Economic, yes. I think, yeah, these are benefits, but they're benefits which would arise from any development anywhere in the country. And they could equally arise on schemes which do not give rise to the levels of harm identified. So, in my opinion, they should be afforded moderate weight rather than substantial.
Okay, thank you. The 11th benefit then, please, the provision of public open space. That's given substantial weight by the appellant. What do you say about that?
Yes, it is a benefit, the public open space, although it is possible for the existing residents of the village to use this space. It's not that easy accessible for most existing properties, and in reality, this open space is primarily provided to meet the additional needs generated by development. So, in my opinion, I think it should be moderate weight, not substantial.
Okay, so moderate for that one as well. And then biodiversity net gain, I think the figure is 6.74%. How do you say that should be dealt with?
Yes, it's recognised there is a net gain in biodiversity, and the appellant does make reference to that there is no set standards in net gain set out in the development plan or the framework. However, a net gain of 6.74% is not massive. Actually, reviewing the biodiversity impact calculator, which is within the planning application documents, it seems to suggest that the proposed development would actually reduce the biodiversity of the peel site by about 30%, and the actual gain is provided by the mitigation lands elsewhere, rather than so effectively the biodiversity gain is provided to mitigate the impacts caused by the development rather than for any wider benefit. So I think it should be minimal weight really rather than substantial.
Okay, so difference again. Off-site contribution towards off-site equipped play areas and allotments. Again, the appellant says substantial. How do you deal with that?
My view is that this is a planning obligation provided to meet the needs of the development. So the weight is really moderate rather than substantial.
Fine. Okay. Well, thank you then. Is there anything else you wish to deal with on benefits, or should we turn to your overall balance?
No, that's fine.
Afraid we've run slightly over time. But I'll just ask you then to very briefly summarise. I know this is set out at the end of your proof, but for anyone who's listening on YouTube, for example, your views on the overall planning balance, please.
Yes. Obviously, as we know, the proposal is for 82 dwellings on an allocated site in the neighbourhood plan. Although we've discussed the relevant housing policies may be out of date, a moderate degree of weight can still be afforded to these policies due to the 5-year housing supply issue, and therefore there is no dispute over the principle of residential development, and therefore there is a substantial planning benefit. However, in respect of the first reason for refusal, we've seen in the evidence of Catherine Backhouse that the introduction of a substantive junction and that associated infrastructure on the I always get this wrong, B3400 would lead to unacceptable impact on highway safety. This has been shown to be contrary to local plan policy CN9, and as we heard earlier, that paragraph 111 of the framework, development should only be prevented or refused on highway plans if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be split. Therefore, proposed actors will create adverse impacts in regards to highway safety. and therefore, in my opinion, does not provide sustainable development, as contrary to paragraph 111, as well as the local plan policies here and 9. Therefore, in my opinion, this would be sufficient to warrant refusal on its own, even in the context of the tilted balance.
So that's the first reason for refusal, and has an suspicion. The second reason for refusal, please just summarise that.
Yeah, the second reason for refusal is contrary to the MPPF.
Yeah.
Paragraph 127 states that.
Yeah, we've looked at 127, I think. I mean,
Yeah,
by all means, say it again, but
paragraphs 127, 128, and 134, we will discuss, but I'll just bring your attention to paragraph 134 that confirms that development that is not well designed should be refused, especially where it fails to reflect local design policies, government guidance on design, such as the National Design Guide, which we discussed earlier. The proposed development does not meet this guidance in the relevant design policies or the government guidance, and we have shown it's contrary to development plan policy EN10. Given the importance placed in the framework, this matter, I believe, would be sufficient to warrant refusal on its own.
Okay, so you've dealt with them individually. Can I ask you just to draw the issues together collectively? Your view, obviously, your planning judgment here. Others may exercise different planning judgments, but your planning judgment on how those reasons for refusal work and what you invite the inspector to do here.
Yes, so each reason would justify refusal on its own. Obviously, taken together, the result's clearer. We acknowledge that provision of housing is a substantial benefit. The other benefits we've seen are only moderate. Therefore, on balance, I conclude permission should be refused because the adverse impacts of the proposed development identified in the evidence significantly and demonstrably outweigh the identified benefits of the development.
Okay, so what do you invite the inspector to refuse the scheme then? Sorry, you just said that.
Yes.
Lovely. Well, those are all the questions I have for you, no doubt. I don't know if anyone will have questions in cross-examination. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Defoe. Thank you, Mr. Butterworth. I think I'd just like to take a 10-minute break, if I may. So we'll reconvene at 15:20. Thank you. Good afternoon again. So it's 3:20 and the inquiry is resumed. Mr. Warren, over to you for cross-examination.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Butterworth, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to put my mic on.
I can hear you too, that's good. So I just want to begin very briefly by coming back to what you said at the beginning of your examination in chief about the other reasons for refusal. I know that for highways you rely on as backhouse as evidence.
Yes.
That's right, isn't it? And reason for refusal 5 on section 106, as we'll come to tomorrow, I think the position is the council's seen the unilateral undertaking and is, am I right, content that it deals with the points under reason 5?
Yes.
And that's something, obviously, things that can be dealt with in that way in a section 106, that had the council resolved to grant planning permission, you would have expected to have been done in due course by the completion of the 106, am I right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it would have been granted subject to the signing of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And ditto, really, the fourth reason, which is also dealt within the 106, isn't it? The nitrates mitigation point and the biodiversity net gain point.
Yes, yeah.
And so on reason for refusal 3, which is now, we've got the point about the kickabout, I know, in reason 2, but we've reached agreement. That agreement was reached, wasn't it, when the appellant substituted or applied at that point to substitute drawings which switched flats to houses, am I right?
That's correct, yes, yeah.
Okay, and that's something, obviously that's picked up, isn't it, in the list of substituted drawings in the condition?
Yes.
So, I think we touched on that right at the beginning yesterday.
I believe that's the drawings as in CD 69, isn't it?
You're right, and in the amended statement of common ground, those ones in yellow, yes, highlighted substituted drawing. And again, that point, as the course of the appeal made clear, was something which was, I won't say readily, but was capable of being dealt with by way of that substitution and condition. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, so that leaves for you reason 2, including the kickabout point. You refer, the reason refers, as we know, to cramped and refers to policy EM10 and the SPD. Yeah. And within EM10, it's 1D, 2A, and 2C.
Yes.
Isn't it, that you raise? Yeah. Okay. And in the, you just quickly, sorry for cantering along, but this is all, I just want to make sure about these points. They are, I think, largely agreed. But if you go to the statement of common ground, Mr. Butterworth, please, the main one.
Yeah, go away. I've lost it now. The 27th of August one, yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
On page 19 of that, in the section on the development plan.
Yeah.
Couple of points. I think there are 8 most important, in inverted commas, policies that the parties agree are the most important at 5.8 there. Yes. And the ones that are, as it were, outstanding in terms of issues between the parties are the 4th one, CN9, that's the highways point.
Yep.
And EM10, the last one, which is your point about cramped and so on. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We agree that in relation to the other most important policies, the scheme complies with those parts of the development plan.
Yes, those other policies have all been solved by the section 106. Yeah.
We also know, don't we, that if you look at the full list of relevant policies in the local plan, which is at 5.6, again, it's only CN9 and EM10, which are said by the council still to be breached. Is that right?
Yes.
And that includes, as we'll come to, not now and indeed not when permission was refused, any allegation that any aspect of the neighbourhood plan would be breached by the proposals. Am I right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And just one final point on that, which we'll come back to when we're looking at the topography and the views points that you make. The neighbourhood plan has, doesn't it, a policy, if you've still got that page open, just to identify it in advance, a policy called LBE1, which is landscape, the built environment and local distinctiveness.
Yes.
You with me? And obviously it follows from what we just said that that policy isn't said to be breached by this scheme, is it?
No.
All right, thank you. Fine. So we know what the section 38.6 test is. Obviously the inspector's got to form a view about overall compliance, doesn't he, with the development plan, first of all. And then there's the question of material considerations, and that obviously includes material considerations, the NPPF, and whether the scheme complies with the NPPF. The NPPF here, we're in a paragraph 11D situation, if I can put it that way. And we agree with that. Yeah. On that, it is, isn't it, a question of the inspector deciding whether any adverse effects that he finds don't just outweigh the benefits, but significantly and demonstrably outweigh.
Yes, that's
right?
correct. Yes.
And do you understand that significantly and demonstrably test to mean would have to outweigh them by some margin? Is that a fair kind of AKA for that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. So there's no in principle objection to the scheme, as we know from your evidence, is there?
No. I think it's common knowledge that the site is allocated for housing. There's no objection to residential development.
And it's allocated for housing in a neighbourhood plan, which, as we know, isn't said to be breached by the scheme and is up to date. There's no dispute, I think, between us, is there, that the neighbourhood plan is up to date?
No dispute, no.
Okay. And even though it's only by a month and it doesn't really matter in this case, it is actually slightly the later, isn't it, of the two development plan documents by a month, I think. The neighbourhood
I believe
plan
it's very close, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Not sure that matters really here. Okay. And we don't need to spend much time in it, but the inspector's seen that as far as the local plan is concerned, the site lies outside the settlement boundary in the countryside, but that's not said, is it, to be itself a policy conflict, because the local plan makes provision for housing to be met through neighbourhood plans in part, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and then I won't take you through this, all in the evidence and agree. It drops us through, doesn't it? SS1, delivery through neighbourhood plans in the local plan, and SS5, at least 150 in Overton. Yeah. Okay, and then we come to the neighbourhood plan itself. Could we at this point just grab a hard copy or a soft copy of the neighbourhood plan?
Yes, yeah.
Or document 12, I think. Tell me when you're there.
Yeah, I'm in it, yeah.
You got it, okay. If you go, please, to the policy within it, which is, if you're looking at the screen, it's PDF page 28 of 53.
Yep.
And you should find there H1.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have that, sir? Sorry, I'm finding
I
can't.
got that in front of me, yes.
Policy H1.
H1, yes, thank you. And so H1 talks about residential development within the existing built-up area of Overton and on the sites allocated in this plan. We know, obviously, and come to it in a moment, that site F is one of those sites, and it says that residential development within the on those sites will be supported subject to, and then there are 4 criteria, aren't there? And I don't think that any one of those is said, is it, to be breached, obviously, by this proposal?
No. Obviously subject to the section 106, but
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm with you, obviously subject to that. But the inspector should note, I put it to you negatively first. There's no suggestion, an allegation of a breach of the neighbourhood plan, but actually H1 says that this scheme would be supported on the basis of those criteria, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Yeah, okay. And then if we go down to H, We don't need to look at H2, approximately 150. H3, applications to residential development should demonstrate how they've taken into account various things. And H3 says, and should demonstrate that landscaping responds positively to the character of the area. Again, I don't think the landscaping aspects of the proposal are really something that you're critical of, are they?
No.
Okay. All right, and then we come all the way down to the site policy. It's, well, if we go to page 41 of 53, if you're on the PDF.
Yeah.
Page 41. We get to the allocated sites and we see policy SS1, the development of approximately 150 homes will be permitted on the following sites. I don't think, Mr. Butterworth, it makes much difference that the local plan says at least 150 and the neighbourhood plan says approximately. Does it?
No, I don't think there's any dispute that approximately
No.
70 is not exactly 70, is it? It's...
No. It doesn't really matter here because it's not we're not arguing about the 82 versus the 70.
No, I think it's always taken as read that, that's a sort of a lower estimate, and anything above that is a bonus.
Yeah, and I think in terms of 82 versus 70, I've understood the agreed position that the parties have reached as being it's on the right side, obviously, of 70. It's not too few, and it's in the general ballpark, if I can put it that way, of the approximate number in the plan. Is that fair? Yes. Okay. All right, and then when we come to site F itself, if you drop down to the bottom of page 42, south of Tewgate Lane, 6.8 hectares, 70 dwellings within the area bounded in red. But again, we're not, I think, arguing, are we, about the principle of housing down towards the broken dotted line, because the policy says, if required, the site boundary may be extended towards the dotted blue line. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And in terms of the red line and where the green space, the designated green space is, the inspector needs to bear in mind, doesn't he, that that drawing is labelled, isn't it, as you can see under it, indicative only?
Yes, yeah. And
Okay.
the wording says approximate extent of the site boundary as well.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I don't think we're in dispute over is the fact that when we come to look at the point about where the kickabout or where the open space goes, it's not being said putting it where it's proposed to be put in the scheme is a breach of this neighbourhood plan policy. You're putting it slightly differently in terms of overall design, as I understand.
Yes, yeah.
All right, that's helpful, thank you. Okay, and just while we're here, if you scroll down, there are a couple of points that seemed obviously sufficiently important to specify about the site. Access will be to the B3400. Again, that is obviously where the access is going to and from. There will be a multi-use footpath with public rights of way from the development to the lower end of Tewgate Lane. And again, we're not in dispute over compliance with that criterion, are we?
No.
Okay. All right. Now it's notable, or rather, it's true. Let me put it very neutrally. It's true, isn't it, that the policy here for site F doesn't say one should not build housing towards the southeast corner of the site because of visual or landscape reasons?
No, it's clear that it's just a vague policy of here's where 70 dwellings should go. I suppose the intention is that you then defer to urban design policies within the plan.
More general policies is actually to work out an acceptable scheme. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Fine. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Before we come to cramped itself, this, if you just go back up, would you mind to the indicative drawing on page 42?
Yeah.
We've got there the whole of the site area, haven't we? The 16.8 acres and 6.8 hectares. In terms of the kind of numbers aspect of this, we're not arguing, I think, are we, about whether the density, the dwellings per hectare or the habitable rooms per hectare is or isn't appropriate here? That's agreed, I think, isn't it, between us?
Yes, yeah.
And we'll come back to this in terms of Crampton and so on, but we do also agree, don't we, that the scheme is a low density scheme, the one that's in front of the inspector.
Yes, I believe we agreed that in the statement of common ground.
Yeah, and it's in your proof, I think 4.1.67 of your proof. It's not been an issue. So low density. All right. And I think the way that, I mean, if we look very quickly, just so that we've got the numbers in mind, it's quite useful to do this when you're looking at that indicative drawing, actually. If you go to the main, again, statement of common ground, page 24 this time. There's a bit on density at E.
Yes.
Yeah, and it says that the density of the built area within the appeal site, i.e. excluding the site access, the woodland edge, the woodland buffer, the suds basins and the kickabout area, is 24.6 dwellings per hectare. So that's 82 dwellings within 3.33 hectares. Yeah?
Yes.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
So 24.6, that's what we agree to be low density. And also we can see from that, can't we, that the built area is 3.3 1/3 hectares as against an overall area of 6.8.
Yes.
If you look at the site F, yeah, okay. Thank you. Now, even though the scheme has come forward as a low density scheme in those terms, Mr. Butterworth, we agree, don't we, that it is important nonetheless to make effective and efficient use of land in accordance with the framework?
Yes, yeah, that's a given, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the key principle of sustainable development.
Key principle, paragraphs 124, 125, and so on of the framework. And here again, it's not an issue, but it's not wholly irrelevant, is it, to the question of the right balance to be struck by a scheme? That it's no dispute that low density is appropriate, but on the other hand, one has to balance that against making, as it were, best use, efficient use of the site.
Yes, yeah, it's clearly a balancing exercise between the most efficient use and the best site solution.
And I won't take you to the policy itself. I'll just use, it might be slightly easier, I think, for everyone if I use Charles, you've got Mr. Charles' proof there. Do you have that one in hard copy?
I have it.
In Miss Charles' proof.
What page, Mr. Warren?
I'm looking at page 13 of 42. 13 of 42. That's where her table in relation to EM10 starts.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just finishing off on this point about density. One of the three parts of EM10 that's still an issue between us is 1D, isn't it? And that's the criterion: promote the efficient use of land and achieve appropriate housing densities which respond to ... and then things about context and documents and so on.
Yeah.
Now, that is actually a criterion, isn't it, about achieving an appropriate site density? In other words, how many units there are within the site?
It's about appropriate densities, and the efficient use of land, I suppose. I suppose in reality it is ultimately about the density, but it's also about the other factors taken into account, the location of the site.
Yeah, but I think you're right. There are lots of criteria in EM10.
I suppose what it's saying is, the density is a factor of the appropriate design of the site, taking into account its location, isn't it? Rather than
the way that I was going to put it to you was, I'm so sorry, Mr. The way that I was going to put it to you was slightly differently. I mean, if you look across the page or down the page, depending on how you're doing it, to criterion 2A, we've got, haven't we, local distinctiveness, sense of place, and so on.
Yes,
and we've got, haven't we, at 2C, part of the same policy, have due regard to the density scale, layout, appearance, etc. of the scheme. Yeah. Are you with me?
Yeah,
so I'm not sure it makes a huge amount of difference in the end, but I rather see, and I wonder whether we agree in the end, the points that are really an issue between us still are more about 2A and C, because 1D is really a point about, is it the appropriate density? And we agree that the 24.6 is an appropriate density here. Are you with me?
Yeah. I mean, I could agree that 2A and the 2 is more relevant than 1D. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's not giving any of your case away. It's just putting it in relation to another part of EM10 rather than this part. Okay. Thank you. Fine. Now, could we just quickly, before we come to topography and so on, I'm going to use, it's within CD69, which is the plans bundle, but Miss Charles has also given us a drawing at her appendix 2, which has got the site layout on it, the one with the green colouring for the open space areas and the woodland edge.
Okay, that's.
Could we have a look at that one? That's it's in her appendix 2. If you're in CD69, it's drawing number 69, funnily enough.
Yes, that's the same one I was referring to.
Are you with? Yeah, exactly. Funny, it's just one of the easier ones to
use.
Yeah. Okay. Are you there, sir?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not at the moment, but I will be very shortly.
Thank you.
It's in her appendix to a proof. The appendix forms part of the proof.
It does. It's just a couple of pages stuck on the end. If I can put it that way.
On the PDF version, it's page 41 of the PDF, I think.
You're very kind. I think it's almost the last page, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And I'm sorry. So for various technical reasons today, I'm stuck with one screen. So when I'm looking at a document, it's quite difficult to see whether you're there or not. So forgive me for keep asking. Okay. So if you have a look then, Mr. Butterworth, at that drawing.
Yeah.
There isn't an issue, I think, between us, is there, about when we're thinking about layout, anything to do with the layout of the streets? The streets are not too wide, not too narrow. They work. There's nothing wrong with the layout of the streets, as I understand.
No, I assume you're talking in terms of road widths and lengths and
Yeah, because sometimes there are compromised layouts and you have to back out and the lorry won't go around and the bin lorry doesn't work, etc. There's no issue with the appropriateness of the layout here in terms of streets.
No, there's no objections to the internal.
And obviously it's a detailed scheme. There's no objection to the mix of the building types themselves, and then how many of them are houses, how many of them are flats, etc.
No. I mean, obviously we've raised issues on sort of the amount of detached and semi-detached, but there's no actual issue with the number of 3 beds or 2 beds or flats or anything like that.
No. Thank you. And in terms of the open spaces that we can see coloured up on here, these are really the non-private, if you like, open spaces that are coloured, because obviously one needs to take into account, doesn't one, when thinking about how a layout will appear in the real world, the fact that there are trees in the streets and planting in the streets, and also private gardens that you might be able to see through. Yeah. Now we'll come back to those, but in terms of the public open spaces, there isn't any dispute between us about appropriateness of their size or their quality, is there? No,
there's no dispute over the type and size. it's only the location really.
It's really the location of the kickabout
Yeah.
pass, isn't it? And we'll come back to this, but one of the I know that you've seen all the background and the discussions that took place. Part of those discussions, as normal, were about technical things like drainage. And when Bewley got to the stage of putting the scheme together, obviously those discussions were had. And unsurprisingly, the SUDs, the drainage areas, need to be in the lower parts of the site. Otherwise, you have to pump the water uphill.
Yes, yeah, that's understandable.
So it's in terms of this drawing, you see where the two main basins are that might be used in conditions that would require them. They're in the lower they're part of the lower lying contour, aren't they? There. Yeah, and you'd expect them in any reasonable layout to be in those locations, wouldn't you? Those SUDS areas.
Well, you'd expect them to be in lower areas, although there's no reason why they can't be excavated or anything elsewhere, I suppose.
Okay, but there's no objection to them being there, as I understand it. You're not saying that there's anything wrong with putting the SUDS areas there in any sense, including how they'd appear?
There's no objection to there's no objection to SUDS, and I suppose the one in the kickabout area is sort of integral to the kickabout area, isn't it? But
well, I don't know. I mean, I think it obviously needs to function. That's why it's been designed in that location and so on. So there will be times, obviously, when you can't use it for anything other than storage of water. But the kickabout area that we're really concerned about is the area, isn't it, that isn't SUDS, just to the north of that?
I mean, we're sort of taking the whole area as one.
Okay. Fine, all right. But in terms of part of the area that we are discussing then, the kickabout area, if you're taking it as the whole lot, there isn't any objection to having the SUDS located in that part of the site, is there? Which has to be open.
Well, as part of the overall layout, there's no objection to SUDS, obviously, but as part of the overall layout, as I discussed, that the open space, including the SUDS, would be, from an urban design perspective, would be better in a different location. I accept it's there because that's the lowest ground, but obviously, as you heard from my argument, that because it's the lowest grounds, that is also a least suitable place for it, effectively.
No, obviously, I did hear that.
And design.
I heard that, obviously, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But insofar as there's an overlap between the open area and the SUDS, I take it you'd accept it wouldn't be as sensible or optimal to locate the SUDS in the southeastern corner of the site, where you'd have to pump the water up to it. It probably wouldn't be SUDS.
Well, it wouldn't be sensible to pump the water to it, but obviously, excavation and landscaping of the site could provide a similar function in that area. Yeah.
All right, but just to be absolutely clear before we leave it, there are two SUDS areas, and you don't have any objection per se, as I understand it, to those SUDS areas, including their openness, being in that part of the site. Just thinking about how they will appear.
In terms of the appearance of the SUDS area,
how they'll appear.
Yeah, we have no objection to the appearance of the SUDS area.
All right. Okay, and in terms of there's an existing you've been to the site, I heard you say in your evidence in chief. You'll have seen that there is I think it's fair, I'm not going to over egg it, I think, by saying there's a strong, isn't there, strong boundary vegetation down the eastern side of the site and round to the south of the site as well.
There is, yes, yeah.
And you can see some of that on this illustration. And the scheme has put a buffer in, hasn't it? Which is in the lighter green on the eastern side. It's got a foot route through it, pedestrian route through it, and there'll be some trees and so on planted in that area. But that's an offset, isn't it, between the housing area and that existing woodland?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And again, there's no, I think, criticism, is there, on your part or the council part of that part of the scheme?
No, there's no objection to buffer.
Okay. Nor to the hatched area on the southern, I'll call it southern southeastern boundary.
No, there's no.
No, okay. Fine. And there's no issue between us about the adequacy of amenity space. Is there kind of private amenity space or the overall amount or quality of public amenity space on the site?
No, there's no issue over the quantum of private or public community space.
No.
That's
Okay.
That's been solved by the revised plans.
Thank you. The way that the buildings would look themselves in terms of their architecture, their height and scale, there's no issue between us on that, I think, either.
No, there's been no objection over the.
And I mean, the officers formed this view, and I haven't heard anything differently from you in your evidence, Mr. Butterworth. You're content, are you, that obviously subject to the final working through of the conditions, that this would be a high quality scheme in terms of the architecture of the buildings?
Yes. I've had no evidence to the contrary that they wouldn't be high quality looking dwellings.
Okay, so coming to the question of whether the layout is in any sense cramped, you've noted already in your remarks in chief, Mr. Butterworth, that obviously wasn't what the officers thought when they were recommending approval to the members, was it?
No.
Can we agree? I mean, there are other ways to define it, but a sensible definition of what cramped means is uncomfortably small or restricted.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a dictionary definition in front of me, but that seems fairly sort of.
Will that do? Uncomfortably small.
Good analysis of the word.
I mean, the reason I use the word uncomfortably as well as restricted is that cramped has a connotation, doesn't it, of being squashed up in a detrimental way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So that's what cramped means. And the reason says in relation to the site area, doesn't it? Cramped appearance in relation to the site area.
It does, yes.
Yeah. So when the inspector's thinking about this, is the council's case that he should just be thinking about this, as it were, within the red line of the site?
Well, I mean, I suppose we can only assess the scheme in relation to what's inside the red line. Although, its appearance from outside the red line is obviously still relevant.
It is relevant, is it? Okay, so the inspector needs to think about this in not just as the reason appears to say in relation just to the area of the site, because that sounds a bit like how many on what area of land, but in the context, as you've invited the inspector to do, in the context of Overton.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now, you gave very briefly. You gave twice, I think, in your evidence in chief. You gave some evidence about subjectivity when things like cramped are and urban design judgments are concerned. And you said beauty is in the eye of the beholder and so on. I just wonder, though, you recognise, obviously, in those and anticipated one of the things I was going to put to you, I think, when you were making those comments, that not just the officers, but plainly some reasonable people would consider the scheme to be acceptable, wouldn't they, in design terms?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I would accept that. I've seen schemes like this approved all over the country, but at the same time, I've seen schemes like this refused all over the country. So
yeah,
it's
so room for discretion. Reasonable people would find this of high quality. The thing that slightly troubles me about that is, yes, that's true. That might be something that we discuss when we're trading blows on costs. But I mean, when you think about the MPPF, should a council like Basingstoke and Dean be refusing otherwise acceptable development on the basis of things like their view on cramped design, if they recognise that many people would consider it to be entirely acceptable? Is that what they should be doing?
I mean, I think it's as we say, it's subjective, and I think it's a reasonable subjective viewpoint.
Yeah, but if it is, you see, it's not necessarily the end of the question, I think, is it? Because if the council recognises that, should it be refusing when it recognises full well that 50% of people or more, perhaps, would think that it was an acceptable scheme?
I mean, to be honest, it's hard to answer that because, obviously, 50%, if 50% would think it's good, why?
I said
why
all
can't
50.
50 why can't 50% disagree? It's one of those.
It's an interesting question, but we'll leave that one there, and the inspector can make what he will of that. I want to then look at the question of whether the scheme is cramped or uncomfortably small or restricted, by working through a few of the points that you make. And I just want to go back. Can we go back to that drawing that we were looking at from Miss Charles's evidence, or the one in CD 69?
Yes.
The layout drawing. When you come into the site through the main entrance, main vehicular, and indeed if you're coming down from the road, the main pedestrian entrance, you'd come in, wouldn't you, to an area which has one of the smaller of the two suds ponds in it?
Yes, you
come down into that.
You come in past sort of the woodland edge.
Then you've got
a couple of houses, and then you've got the green space. Yes.
So one's first impression coming in, certainly by car, is of housing, but with public open space immediately in front of you when you come in, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you then follow through that road, if you like, going in a kind of broadly southwest direction, it comes round, doesn't it, between two more little blocks, if you like, perimeter blocks of housing, and you get another triangular piece of open space through which you would see the larger, or over which you'd see the larger bit of open space with the kickabout and the suds pond in.
Yes. Yeah. You would see that. Yes.
All right. And so in that area of the site, I don't think it's right to say that you'd get a feeling of the design being cramped, would you? As you come in along the main road, you're really talking about the parts in the centre and the southeast. Am I right of the design?
Yeah. I mean, in that context, you've obviously got to look, at the concept that as the site's sloping down, you would see less and less. So, parts of that open space in the sods area you may not necessarily see from the road so easily. But yeah, I mean, effectively, yeah, I mean, the sort of more central area is the area which is, I think you've disappeared.
We'll just give him a moment. Oh, hello, Mr. Warren. We lost you for about 10 seconds.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't detect that. I do apologise.
Well, actually, Mr. Butterworth was speaking at the time, so I don't necessarily.
I could hear Mr. Butterworth.
I can hear you. You just sort of disappeared on my screen, so I wasn't sure if you were still there.
Sorry, no.
So we heard
I promise I won't go.
We heard Mr. Butterworth finish his answer. I don't know whether it might be.
As did I.
Okay, that's fine.
In that case, let's just continue.
Yeah, thank you. What I was doing while listening to the end of that answer, Mr. Butterworth, was just going through from the plan that we were looking at to add one additional point in by reference to one of the other drawings in CD 69. Have you got that open or available
yes.
to you? Yeah. Can I just ask you to go through that drawing until you get to, forgive me. Sorry, I'm just scrolling myself. Sorry.
Sounds like school is out.
School is very much out and is in the hall. I'm just outside this room. Forgive me.
I was actually just trying to work out whether that was your kids or my kids.
Yeah. So yes, the drawing that I just wanted to forgive me. The drawing that I was looking for is a drawing 060. It's the first one of 17 and 69.
Yeah, the one with the green and the yellow and the blue.
Yeah, of the different types, the different unit types.
Yeah.
And
which plan would that be? Well,
It's the first one, so in 69, it's 060,
Oh, yes,
page
yeah.
1 of 17.
Yeah.
And it just shows the different types, doesn't it, of unit. But one of the other benefits of this presentation is it also shows you, doesn't it, the gaps between the buildings. Yeah,
It does, yes.
and so we've got our road layout that we mentioned earlier on. There's also some pedestrian or cycle only routes, aren't there, in the design, including one quite important one through the middle. Do you see down the middle of the site, separating those two perimeter blocks in the middle of the scheme?
Yes.
North south. And when the inspector's considering whether the scheme would appear uncomfortably small or restricted, he needs to bear in mind, doesn't he, not just the roads and the trees, but glimpses and views between the houses and down non-vehicular routes within it.
Yes. This plan shows houses, doesn't it? But it doesn't have the garages coloured in, so there will be.
Oh, sure, but they're all single
additional built form that's not. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, for instance, if you come down past the little triangular public open space, so past that part that I was asking you about in terms of, you know, one's first impressions coming through past the open spaces, and you get down towards the bottom left-hand corner, if you like, the southwestern corner of the scheme, you've then got a long rectangular perimeter block, haven't you, running along in the middle of the scheme on the southern boundary?
Yes.
Yeah. And you'd be able to see, wouldn't you, and have the experience of the space and the gardens and planting in the gardens all the way between that row of houses running, broadly speaking, east-west.
I suppose over fences and over garages and things like that, you would see through. But
that's right.
It would give you a perception of there being a row of houses, obviously.
Yes, exactly. Well, you get the obvious impression that there are houses that are back to back. They've got their gardens and so on. But you get the impression whenever you see a layout like this of the spaces that divide them, as well as where the buildings are. But that's obvious, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now I'll just stay with this drawing because, again, it's useful to look at a slightly more technical looking drawing when asking these questions. There isn't any question, is there, on the part of the council here that there's any breach of any applicable standard in relation to the housing. So there's no question of any minimum size being breached, any garden size being breached, is there?
No. My understanding is that the gardens are all sufficient size.
There's no question of any set-off distance in policy or guidance being breached.
No, not that I'm aware of.
No question of any loss of privacy or impacts on privacy or sunlight or daylight or overshadowing within the scheme.
No, nothing that's been mentioned. No.
So, I mean, as a modern residential scheme, it is fully compliant, isn't it, in terms of its layout with what you would hope.
Yeah. It meets all the relevant policy standards for housing development.
Yeah. All right. And if one's looking for whether something is and a scheme is cramped or not, obviously there are sometimes symptoms, aren't there, of overdevelopment, like impacts on sunlight, daylight, or insufficiently sized gardens, or various compromises that become evident as soon as you look at probe the detail of the scheme. But there isn't anything, is there, of that kind?
There's no policy conflicts.
No. So there are no policy conflicts, but there are no such, how did I put it, symptoms, indicators that the scheme is overdeveloped, are there?
No. Only the subjective, design points, I suppose.
Yeah. Only the subjective design. What did you say? Sorry.
The subjective design points. The sort of.
Yeah. Yes, I see. The character of the layout layout, we've got, haven't we, a number of areas. I think there are 7 actually in all, if you go around and count them, as separated by the roadways and the footpaths, and they're broadly disposed, aren't they, as perimeter type blocks? Yeah.
Yes.
Some of them, as you noted in your evidence in chief, particularly on the southern and the eastern side, are slightly looser, aren't they, in terms of detached properties and so on, facing outwards towards the woods?
Yeah, towards the eastern side,
Yeah.
There's terraces and some,
So if you were walking around this scheme when it was built, you would detect, wouldn't you, some variety in the types of houses, their sizes and so on, as you went round? You'd be able to see that?
Yes, you would, yeah.
All right. We know what the officer's report said, obviously, about the acceptability of the layout. They didn't make a point, did they, about the SPD requiring or stipulating a certain type of layout here, did they?
No, the committee report does not mention anything like that, no.
No. And you made a point, you make a point in your proof, and you went back to it in your evidence in chief, about the SPD and what it says about rural layouts. Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah.
That's in core document, where are we? There we go.
15.
Core document 15. Could we just go back to that? I think it's on page 64 of 170. Core document 15, sir.
Yes.
If you've got, are you there, Mr. Butterworth?
Yes, I am, yes.
Thank you very much. On page 15, we've got that principle that you referred to, ABS 14, and it says ensure that rural development has a rural as opposed to suburban character and reflects the local context. So just breaking that down, when the inspector is walking around Overton, bearing in mind we've agreed that he mustn't just restrict himself to the red line, if you like, here. He needs to look, doesn't he, at what other kinds of developments have characterised the local context?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So he needs to look at Twoggate Meadow, for instance, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's the adjacent to the side.
The adjacent one. And you've been there, I know. Have you been into Twoggate Meadow?
Yes, I have, yeah.
It isn't, is it, markedly different from what's proposed by Bewley in this case, in terms of its layout?
It's not. I mean, I suppose we could go into a debate about whether that's acceptable or not as well, but
well, granted consent, obviously, and built, it is
exactly
part of the local context, isn't it?
It is, yes.
One would have to take into account in applying this principle, and ensure that rural development has a rural as opposed to suburban character. Now, I've had a hunt through. I can't see in the SPD anything, probably me being too much of a lawyer, but I can't see a definition of what this document considers to be rural development. I mean, I don't think there is one, is there?
No, I don't think it defines
to be corrected.
what that means, no.
No. You were asked, I think actually in relation to this bit of your evidence on the SPD by Mr. Dufour, about whether it made any difference that this was an allocated site. It does make a bit of a difference, doesn't it? Because we're dealing with at least 70 unit extension, aren't we, to quite a large village?
Yeah, I think I would agree that obviously if it wasn't an allocated site, you would apply a more rural approach. Than
I think that's fair. And I mean, for instance, you don't say that one of the problems with this scheme, do you, is that it doesn't have buildings in it that are pretending to be farmhouses or anything of that?
No.
Okay. I mean, in the example of such a thing that they've obviously got in mind in this document, the drawing, it says this example of a rural style layout involves a very clear definition of space and incorporates rural features such as a village green and a courtyard layout in the top right hand corner. However, the layout still incorporates important urban design principles such as perimeter blocks, buildings which turn corners effectively. So even in the more obviously rural example they're giving, perimeter blocks and open spaces for public use are still seen as appropriate, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. I don't think there's any dispute that perimeter blocks aren't acceptable. I think
And I mean, one of the things that you can see, I know that this isn't a kind of template, computer says yes or no about any scheme, this drawing, but it's interesting, isn't it, that it does show as potentially acceptable in a rural location, housing which is all joined together, rows of terraces, but long buildings. About half the units on that scheme illustrated there, I think, are connected, aren't they, to each other?
it does show, yeah, some connectability, yeah.
Yeah.
Although, it sort of contradicts the text in some respects.
Yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it? I mean, here again, I'm not sure that much does it, or much shouldn't turn anyway, on percentages of detached and non-detached. I mean, I think you referred to 50% or thereabouts, that 50% of the units are attached to at least one other unit, if you like.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think there's another figure which do we agree is relevant, which is that nearly 80%, 79% of the buildings are in the perimeter blocks, and they're either detached or semi-detached.
Yes, yeah, that's
but again, I don't think it's really about the unit types, is it? It's the point that you're making about the layout is more about, isn't it, just development in the middle and the southeast of the site?
Yeah, I think it's the I keep going on to the word. It's the perception of crampedness due to the visibility of the development sort of further uphill, basically.
Further up the hill. Okay. Well, let's come to that. The contrast that you draw, if you want to, I'm not going to take you to it, but if you want to reference just to satisfy yourself that I'm not misrepresenting what you say, in your 4.1.21, you talk about much of the development being towards the east and the southeast part of the site and so on. I mean, I think I've still got that main layout that we were using open, the one from Miss Charles's appendix.
Yeah.
I mean, there is obviously development in the centre and the southeast of the site, but there's also development in the north and the northwest and the north of the site, isn't there?
The development, does obviously extend towards the north of the site. I mean, obviously, I think the most westerly and northwesterly points are the areas we've not developed.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And we've got buffers, haven't we? I think this was a requirement in the end of the council when the scheme was being negotiated at pre-application stage. We've got that buffer, or those buffers, between the housing and the woodland to the east and the south. So it's not a question, is it, of Bewley having proposed housing kind of squashed right up against the red line boundary of the site. I mean, there's quite a substantial area of open space and planting, isn't there?
Yeah, towards the eastern edge, I agree that there was a buffer,
Yeah. All right. Now, on this question of topography, higher up into the valley, as it were, than if one were to put more of it down into the site. I mean, I'm looking at that drawing. Is it too simplistic of me to see quite a bit of your argument as potentially relating to just taking out the 8 units in the top corner, the southwestern corner, and swapping them for the part of the kickabout area in the south corner? I mean, if that was the way that the layout worked, what I read from your evidence is that you wouldn't be objective.
I mean, that's very simplistic, but I mean, I think the sort of going back to the back-to-back houses and the northwest corner, obviously concentrating more towards that side and removing much of the southeastern area would then result in a better sort of the south and southeastern area would result in a more a less hard edge basically up until the boundary.
Yes. But I mean, we're just looking at the inspector will see this when he goes on site. We're looking at the plan, which has got the buffer as well as that very strong boundary to the east and the south. I mean, that is actually, isn't it, how the scheme would articulate how it would relate to the countryside. It has very strong existing containment, doesn't it, in terms of trees, and there would be an additional buffer between the housing and those trees.
Yes, yeah.
That would actually be the urban edge, wouldn't it, in this location?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get an urban edge wherever you put it, aren't you?
Well, it depends what you mean, really. I mean, my point to you is if we're concerned here as part of this query, whether we are, but if we're concerned here with cramped somehow relating to being too harsh an urban edge, what I'm suggesting to you is when you actually take into account what's there at the moment and the new spaces that would be put in, that edge wouldn't be harsh at all, would it? I mean, that's a soft edge to the urban area with masses of planting on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not a hard edge in itself. I mean, wherever you put that, it's going to be the same, isn't it? Effectively, but
not quite sure what you mean. I mean,
well, I think the point is more that you have the existing village, and then you have a gap, and then you have this development.
Yes, and the development has a buffer planting,
yeah,
and very strong existing vegetation containing it. So the edge of Overton, were this scheme to take place, wouldn't be a harsh edge, would it? With houses and back gardens straight onto the countryside, it would be very well softened by the.
Yeah, it would be softened, yes, but it would appear as less contiguous with the village because you've got the buffer between the existing village and the development.
Do you mean the kickabout area?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to the kickabout in a second. But in terms of these points about where development goes and whether it's a harsh urban edge and so on, we can agree, I think, can't we, just on the basis of the points that we've just been talking about, that the scheme wouldn't itself represent a harsh urban edge were it to be built?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of it being there being a difficulty with where the houses are on the site, we know, don't we, and you mentioned this, I think, in your evidence in chief, that the site, I mean, I think across, it's quite a big site, there's a 5 metre or so, I think, fall across it, isn't there, when you look at the contours, 5 or 6 metres. But it's relatively flat. I think that's the expression used in the statement of common ground.
Yeah, there is sort of a fairly pronounced slope, and then I mean it appears flat, but there is a slope all the way up to the top.
Yeah, but it's quite the inspector will see it. It's not like this. It's a gently sloping side of the valley.
Towards the northwest corner, it's fairly steep, but the rest of it is sort of a gentle slope. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've given us, the inspector will see it on site, but you've given us a couple of photographs, and one of them is in your proof at page 21. I don't know whether you can have a look at that at the same time. Bottom of page 21 of 64.
Yes. And
so we're looking here, aren't we, down towards the existing housing to the west. Yeah. And so we're looking down towards the area, aren't we, where the kickabout area and the suds would be. Yeah. And we can see there, can't we, that actually one of the things that characterizes Overton, the local context at the moment, is that there are houses on gently sloping sides, aren't they? Because you can see the way the houses rise up the other side in this picture.
Yeah.
So having houses that are read together as you read those elevations and roofs together in this particular photograph is part of the local context, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I think as I said, the development sort of spreads out of the valley bottom. Slopes, yeah.
But if that's right, the fact that when you're on the site or near the site, you would see the current scheme doing, what that housing that we're looking at in that photograph does. That doesn't make it out of character, does it, with the local context? It makes it in character with it.
Yeah, I mean, you would see, sort of a hard edge of dwellings, but at the top of the slope, basically, wouldn't you?
Well, I think you would see, wouldn't you, as you see in this photograph, because we're obviously not facing in this photograph towards the mature trees that are on the site boundary. You would see houses, they'd rise up. So in some views, you'd have houses, rows of houses behind other houses, certainly, when you were looking up the slope. But you'd also see, wouldn't you, the tree belt around the edge?
Yeah, you see
because
that.
it's high up, isn't it? The trees are above
the roof.
Yeah. I mean, the inspector will see this, and you've seen it on site. The trees are actually higher up, aren't they? They're on the highest part.
Yes, yeah.
And so those mature trees, canopies and so on will be higher, won't they, than the two-story buildings that are proposed even at the top of the site?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So again, in terms of whether it would appear out of character and too urban or suburban or too much building versus trees, to be fair, Mr. Butterworth, it wouldn't appear very different, would it, from that view of Overton that we're looking at in that picture?
No. I mean, it would appear similar to what you could see from other views. Yes.
Yes. All right. And in terms of views, I think we can probably take this shortly. There aren't any identified views, are there, in any local plan or neighbourhood plan, which the buildings that are proposed here would obscure, would interfere with, get in the way of?
No, I think I've had a walk around, and there were glimpses. There would be glimpses, and they would be more obvious in the winter. But yeah, there's no sort of major views from any particular viewpoint.
And we can go there if necessary. But the neighbourhood plan actually has, doesn't it? I mean, quite a few, about 20 across Overton as a whole, views which they consider to be of particular importance towards and out of Overton. Do you remember that? Should I take you to that if you?
Yeah, I do remember seeing
you
it.
do remember it.
I mean,
for your notes, I don't think it's necessary to go there, but for your note, it's core document 12, page 20. Page 20, identifying the views, and obviously there are none of those views is anywhere near this site, either looking out from Overton or looking across the site or anything of that kind.
No.
All right. And in terms, there's one particular point that I'm interested in your proof on this, and that's 4.1.35, which is at the foot of page 23. 4.1.35. So you're talking here about the kickabout area of the suds, the buffer space.
Yes.
Yeah. This buffer space sits at a generally lower level than the other parts of the site. That's obviously factually correct. And therefore, as stated above, the more urban parts of the site are more visible in longer views. Now, when you say in longer views, we know they're not views that have been identified by the local community as being important, but where are you going to be suggesting the inspector goes to see the longer views that you would get at the site of the buildings on the site?
I mean, these are sort of, I say longer views, I mean, they're more views from outside the site, so.
You mean from Tewgate Lane?
And sort of, well, more from Waltham Road.
Waltham Road, okay.
Or the houses, from the gardens of those houses.
Okay, so longer obviously than being on the site itself, but still in the locality, the immediate locality of the site.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, fine, all right. And obviously, if you're thinking about the effective views from, between, when the inspector goes there, between those houses on Waltham Road, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd be looking through those. So on the plan that we've got, we can see Miss Charles' plan, number 35, for instance, Waltham Road has got its number showing just off the site there. If you're looking through between number 35 and its adjacent house where there's a gap and a garage, you'd be looking through, wouldn't you, towards the site that's allocated for at least 70 houses in the neighbourhood plan?
You would, yes.
So you'd be expecting, obviously, in furtherance of the neighbourhood plan and the local plan, for there to be a view of housing in that view.
Yes, yeah, I would expect to see some
All right.
housing, yes.
So the more urban parts of the site are visible in longer views is something, isn't it, which is inevitable as the development of the local plan and the neighbourhood plan takes place.
Yeah, but based on the site allocation, it would be inevitable that there wouldn't be dwellings, yeah.
Yeah, and from, again, the inspector can view this on site, but from Two-Gate Lane and from, glimpsed views through from Waltham Road, even if you didn't develop the far southeast corner of the site, you would still have views, wouldn't you, of housing stretching up the 5-6 metre slope of the site?
Yes, yeah, you would see.
And I'm not sure, for instance, from Two-Gate Lane, that if the kickabout area, for instance, was in the top corner, you'd see it. I mean, your view would be more contained, wouldn't it, by housing rather than looking over the two big open space areas that this scheme proposes?
Yeah, there would be an area on Two-Gate Lane where you would view housing rather than the kickabout area.
Yeah, but you see the point I'm making. If we're looking at battle of the layouts, if you like, and asking ourselves, is there anything harmful about what's being proposed here? And the idea is, well, what you should be doing is taking that open space area, because putting it down the bottom makes the housing more harmful further up. Actually, if you put the housing right down by Two-Gate Lane and right up to the backs of Waltham Road, you would immediately block any views, wouldn't you, from those lower areas of any of the site other than those immediate housing that you put in?
Yeah, you would have a view of more, closer housing potentially.
Yeah, but I mean, it's fair, isn't it, to say that if you're, again, I'm looking at Miss Charles's drawing just as an aid memoir, as you're on Two-Gate Lane with this scheme, you don't have the impression of housing right up against Two-Gate Lane, do you? Because you've got, or Moore's Farm at the bottom end, because you've got the openness provided by the two public open space areas. Yeah,
you would have a sort of a small buffer between the front. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whether it's small or not, it is what it is. I mean, part of your case is that it's too big a buffer. The kickabout area between the housing and the existing housing.
Yeah. You would sort of have the buffer, and then you'd have the houses at a higher level in the distance.
Yes. All right. Just on that point about back to back, we can deal with that pretty quickly. I don't think you're not saying, as I read your evidence and heard your evidence in chief, that it is an absolute necessity for any successful scheme here to have back-to-back gardens with existing housing on the edge of the site, are you?
I mean, it's in the design guidance. It's guidance. It's not, it's not policy standard. It's not something that has to be followed. It's recommended, for the reasons I state, including for, amenity and security and those issues.
You've given us an example, I think, from the Overton Hill development, haven't you? So on page 24 of your proof. And you say a couple of things about that. I mean, I don't want to go back to softer urban edge, but I mean, the inspector, if interested, can see the urban edge that scheme creates, because there's far less, isn't there, containment to the east of that site. If you look at the large open space running onto the fields there, I mean, when you're on the footpaths and so on to the east of Overton Hill, you get a very, very clear view, don't you, of the housing at the moment, if you've been up there?
Yeah, you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a harsh edge, actually.
Yeah, I suppose the point is that the houses are more back to back, so therefore.
Yes, on that second.
You've got more amenity space on the edge rather than having the housing further east. Yeah.
one of the issues that, I'm not suggesting it's unacceptable development, but one of the issues that throws up though there is that when you're off the site and looking towards it, you look across this open space at the houses, and there's no big buffer planting like there would be around our site. But anyway, that was one. But the point I actually was coming to was the point about stitching in with the backs of the existing houses. Now we know, don't we, that when this scheme went in, there were some existing houses, I think, were there, along the road?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. And you're drawing attention, are you, to this as better integrates as it backs onto the existing rear gardens on Station Road? What you say at 4139?
Yeah. I mean, there is some sort of small gap in between, which I'm not sure what that is, but I mean,
no, I'm not sure that hugely matters.
I mean, the publicly accessible. Like,
no, but one can see, I think, here in Overton, on Overton Hill, why that ribbon of existing housing in their back gardens, it made sense, you know, across down that whole length of the site to back houses into it. I mean, if you take up the plan again of the appeal site, it's a bit more moot, I think, is a bit more questionable whether it's great urban design to do that here, because you haven't got any houses, have you, backing onto the site on Tewgate Lane, apart from, it's on the corner, 1 and 2 Moores Farm. Yeah. And then when you come round to Waltham Road, you've only got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 4 houses there whose back gardens actually abut the site. You with me?
Yeah, you've got 3 houses on Nightingale Rise, and then 2 or 3 houses.
2 or 3, but it's a handful, isn't it? Yeah, 4 or 5, 6 houses. There's not quite the same opportunity, if you like, is it, as you had maybe at Overton Hill to stitch in, and you can see that there are other ways to do it, rather than, you know, as it were, slavishly try and back houses up to them. Instead, a lower part of the site, put suds in the open space there.
I understand why it's been done.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, there's other ways to do it, and it's obviously subjective, but
yes. But I mean, I think the point is, and I explored it by reference to this other example nearby, you're not saying that the SPD means, as it were, thou shalt back up to these 5 or 6 units here, and unless you do so, it's bad design, are you?
No, it's a you know, an aspiration. It's saying, you know, it's better if you can do this, but it's not saying you have to.
No, I mean, it may be better, depends on the context, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, all design depends on the context.
Context, yeah, agreed. Okay, so on the kickabout, let's come back to the kickabout then. We were looking at it just a moment ago on Miss. Hang on a second, have I got the right drawing? Yes, on Miss Charles's drawing that we've been using throughout, that kickabout area, part of which we've got the suds on next to Moore's Farm and so on. Now, I've asked you about how it would be perceived in terms of space and so on. You say, and again, I'm not sure whether you mean exactly what it sounds like, but you describe it as unmanaged in your proof 4.1.30. If you've still got that page we were looking at open, it's only the page. Maybe you're not describing this.
Well, the guidance states that you should avoid unmanaged.
It's a red negative design element to have an unmanaged gap between development used as a privacy buffer. But you know, to be fair, this isn't an unmanaged gap.
Well, yeah, I mean that's it can be managed, controlled by conditions, but you know, we all know that 5 or 6 years down the line, it becomes something that is less managed by you know, the management company, and it's not managed in terms of controlling access or you know, who can access it. So you know, there will be opportunities for people to be up against that boundary.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, the inspector can form a view about what unmanaged means here. But I've asked you about, you know, merits or otherwise of moving the kickabout area elsewhere on the site towards the southeastern corner. But the other point you make is about amenity impacts. Now, I I don't think. I mean, we can see the dimensions are mentioned by Miss Charles in her evidence. We're talking about between 40, 60 and more. You mentioned them in your evidence in chief, I think, Mr. Butler.
Yes, I think
it's a big set of
93
meters
or something. Yeah.
And we're dealing, aren't we, with an area which is for informal play. There's no children's playground. There's no sports facilities where you might get, organised games and whistles being blown and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a grassed area it's a kickabout area.
Yes, yeah.
So you're not suggesting, I think, that there would be an unacceptable noise impact, are you, on Moores Farm or the nearest houses?
Well, I mean, there will be some amenity impact. I mean, obviously, because it's unmanaged, but it's informal space. There's nothing to stop 300 people playing a game of football on it or whatever, is there? But
you say 300 people.
Well, I'm just thinking, when I was a kid, you get every kid in the town to play football here, wouldn't you? But exaggerating, but there's no control over what happens on that space. Whether people playing football, people playing music, people doing antisocial things,
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to grapple with here to assist the inspector is obviously reasonable judgments about what that land might be used for. You're right, obviously, it would be available, wouldn't it? Not just to residents of the scheme, but to residents of Tewgate Meadow and Waltham Road as well.
Yes, it would. Yes.
Yeah. So the people whose residential amenity, in part, is engaged by that are also within the set of people who would benefit from it, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, they can benefit from it. Whether or not they would sort of take, the route round a few hundred meters to use it or not, is obviously up for debate.
But this is an area, isn't it, that what we're really debating in relation to your evidence is where it goes within the scheme. I mean, it would have a relationship with the proposed housing, wouldn't it? Maybe even closer to them than to Moores Farm and so on, were it to be put somewhere else in the scheme.
It would, but if we're talking amenity, the proposed houses will generally face onto the kickback area, will overlook it and provide some sort of level of security. Whereas
well, that does happen here.
The houses on Waltham Road would, it's a dark corner sort of with back fences.
Well, I mean, is that right? I mean, let's be fair, Mr. Butterworth, is that right? I mean, there are houses, aren't there, that have been designed specifically to face onto that area within the scheme.
Yes, there are, yeah.
So it's not right, I think, to say that it would be a kind of background, back area.
No, but if you go down sort of towards the south of the area, you have a couple of flank walls from the new houses there.
Yeah.
And then, effectively a dark dip in the grounds, and then people's houses.
I see. I just want to come back to that question I asked you about noise impacts, though. I mean, you don't obviously present any evidence about noise and what kinds of noise and how loud it would be at that distance.
It's sort of unquantifiable, really. It's
well, yes and no.
Potential
not
noise.
An acquisition. I mean, I think sometimes there are schemes where people make estimates about how loud the mugger noise might be in relation to the sites. I mean, here we're dealing with quite a large area, aren't we? With itself quite a set-off distance from the houses themselves. I mean, the houses in Moores Farm and Waltham Road are, benefit from quite generous gardens, don't they?
Yeah.
So you're not suggesting, I think, that it would cause unacceptable noise impacts, are you, in your evidence?
There will be some noise impacts. I mean, whether it's unacceptable or not really depends on perception and what this kickabout space is used for at the time.
Yes, I know, but I'm asking about your evidence.
It's not something we can quantify. That's basically what I'm saying.
Well, I'm just asking you, sorry, just to be clear about it, because if you've reached your judgment about acceptability on the basis partly of a view that there would be unacceptable noise impacts from the kickabout area, then the inspector needs to know that. I mean, are you saying that, or are you saying there would just be some impact?
Well, we're saying there could be some impact. Yes.
There could be some impact, but you're not saying
not there will be, but there could be some.
No.
Impact, yeah.
And so, does it follow that you're not saying there would be unacceptable noise impacts from the kickabout area?
Yeah, I can see that we can't say for certain there would be unacceptable noise impacts.
Right. Okay. Fine. Thank you. The last series, it's 20 Certa 5. I've only got a very short section on benefits to go before I finish. Shall I just press on?
Yeah. Actually, do you mind if we have a 2-minute comfort break?
Of course. Yeah. By all means. Yeah.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Is that all right, sir?
Yeah, so let's, we'll have a 2-minute, we'll give you a 5-minute comfort break. Why not? Okay, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes. I'll see you back here at 16:45.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, 4:45. So the inquiry is resumed. Mr. Warren, had you finished, or have you got some more questions to go?
I've just got 3 questions on benefits, and then I'm finished.
Okay.
If that's all right, hopefully it'll take 5 minutes. So, Mr. Butterworth, finally, just on benefits, there are 3 things. The first is there's no dispute between us about significant weight being given to housing in the light of the 5-year housing land supply. I just want to explore one very short point with you on your 8.12.5, 8.12.5, if you're approved, which is on page 51.
Yes.
And you're talking, you've just referred there to the AMR for the last couple of years and the delivery of affordable housing, and you say at 8.12.5 the benefit of the delivery of market and affordable housing need, while significant, should be considered in this context. Now, in relation to the weight to be given to the policy compliant affordable housing that's proposed here, we're looking, aren't we, at a situation where the council can't demonstrate a 5-year supply looking forward?
We are, yes.
Yeah, and so in that context, do we agree that the affordable housing provision as well, not just the market housing, should be given significant weight?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I apologise if it's not clear in my.
No, it's all right. It was just
that's the intention of my.
Fine. I just wanted to make sure
that it's a significant benefit for affordable and market. Yeah.
On it as a separate point from significant benefit from market.
Yes.
Yes, I'm grateful. Sorry, it was my fault probably. That's the first question. Second question is about biodiversity net gain. Yeah. And I think it's, again, agreed between us, isn't it, that you give it some weight, I know. You acknowledge, don't you, that the 6.74, I think it is, percent biodiversity net gain isn't something that is just a requirement of policy or law, because there is no policy or law requirement for it.
Yeah, there is no standard of what to achieve. No.
Yeah, and so in that sense, obviously, it's a capital B benefit, if you like, rather than just a benefit that comes from compliance. Yeah,
it is a benefit, although I think we could maybe disagree, because the benefit comes from the off-site mitigation rather than the actual development itself.
It's provided off-site, but that was going to be the second part of this second question. There isn't any problem, is there, in policy terms or legal terms in
there's no objection.
Providing for biodiversity net. Sorry, let me finish. In providing for biodiversity net gain off-site.
There's no objections to that. And that falls part of Section 1.6.
Yeah. So I mean, the point that you made in your evidence in chief, well, it looks like a diminution when you look at the figures on site, and you only get the net uplift of 6 point whatever it is percent when you take into account the off-site provision. But that's okay, isn't it? That's something which policy provides for. Off-site.
There's no policy objection on that.
All right, thank you. The third question is significant weight to, just on your case, significant weight to housing, significant weight to affordable housing, and then a series of moderate or medium weights, if you like, jobs, social infrastructure, and some to biodiversity net gain and public right-of-way improvements and so on. Can we agree overall a significant package of benefits? Is that acceptable as a label?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think the benefits of the housing is a significant benefit, which brings everything else up. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, the other things are on top of what is already 2 significant benefits in the housing on the housing points. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Butterworth. That's the end of my cross-examination. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Not many questions, but I do have 1 or 2, Mr. Butterworth. We talked about views of the site from outside it. Now, obviously, I'm going to be visiting the site shortly, and I'll be on the site and I'll clearly take a look at it there. But I also want to know whether or not there are any views that you would like me, or you think I should take a look at from outside the site. I mean, I've made a note of walking along Wathen Road and taking a look to see what is visible through gaps between buildings there, and clearly I'll be going up to Gate Lane as well.
Yeah.
Any other external viewpoints?
Not really. I mean, I mean, I appreciate you will probably walk around the village anyway, and you know that there may be glimpses of the site, but nothing sort of that is, you know, too important to, you know, mention. So
Okay. Now, one other point, I might very well put this one to Mr. Charles as well. The appeal site doesn't occupy the whole of the field, so that the southern woodland belt is some distance from the actual edge of the appeal site. Do you have any views or any comments to make about that intervening piece of land, or indeed the relationship of the appeal to it?
no, not really. I mean, as you'll appreciate from the neighbourhood plan, I think the appellant has tried to sort of, you know, follow the approximate line of that rather than extending all the way down to the dotted blue line. But I don't think there's any particular sort of reason that crops up that, you know, you should be made aware of.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have. Mr. Defer, do you have any re-examination to put?
No re-examination. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Well, in that case, I think unless there are any other matters that anybody wishes to raise at this stage, I see no hands. My intention then would be to adjourn until tomorrow, when we will hear the evidence from Ms. Charles. So thank you for your contributions today. I'll adjourn the inquiry until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you all.